quick reminder, today we're going Revelation 19 and 20. There are 22 chapters in the book. That means we got this week and 2 more weeks, if everything goes according to schedule, here in the book of Revelation. And um, I'm kind of assuming somebody would like this to continue. I'm having fun doing this, so I'm going to keep doing it if anybody shows up or not and watches online. And the podcast is doing pretty well too. If you want to catch up, you can go to the podcast. The easiest link is at stuffstevesays.com, and it's starting over. We're in chapter 6 or 7, working our way back through it. It's the same stuff, but it's rebroadcast as a podcast. If you want to see that, you can. But my idea right now is, and looking for suggestions and concepts, is take a week, maybe a week off or two. I'm not sure about that part, because I figured out what I'm going to do next. I've got a 1 to 3 week series I want to do on spiritual development, and then I want to go back into and start a unless somebody changes my mind, I probably could start in Romans 1, and we'll go Romans 1, and then after I finish like Romans 1, 2, and 3, probably take a break and do something else like topical or something short, and then go back into Romans. And instead of trying to plow through a whole book like we did with Revelation and take 30 some weeks to do it in a run, to do something a little more piece at a time. So that's sort of the concept. Really open to suggestions. If you have questions you'd like for me to hit, hey, I'd like to hear what's the Bible say about such and such. Just let me know. Pass it on. I'd be more than happy to work it in. And assuming I like the question. If I don't like the question, I won't work it in. But anyway, let's go. We got a lot to cover today, and we're finishing up Revelation 19, moving into Revelation 20, and I want to make a reminder here. This is we're going to hit in Revelation 20. We're going to hit the part that stops everybody. Everybody, just so you know, there's a handful of verses in Revelation 20 that are the key to how everybody comes back and puts a framework of interpretation on the book of Revelation. It all comes out of one little passage in Revelation 20, and people get so caught up in those few verses that they miss what's happening. Okay, so what's happening is we've been watching this series of events, and we saw symbolically and the fall of Babylon, and all that's been done, and we're prepping for the marriage supper of the Lamb and the final victory party, as it were, and the heaven coming to earth, and everything is coming up really soon. But there's this break for judgment. And it starts in chapter 19, verse 11, and runs through chapter 20. And we're going to cover that in a section. And we're going to make sure we see the big picture, because this is John watching the final defeat of evil. I mean, the end of all the wars, the end of all the hypocrisy, the end of all just every deceit, everything evil is about to end. Okay? And so he's getting to watch that. Matter of fact, the key word in the whole passage, which is how chapter 19, verse 11 starts, is I saw. And he says it over and over. And I saw this, and I saw this. He says it in verse 11. He says it in verse 17, I saw, or then I saw, or and I saw. Verse 19, he says it again. Chapter 20, verse 1, he says it again. Chapter 20, verse 4, he says it twice. Chapter 20, verses 11 and 12, he says it again. And in both of those last two, it's a pair. He says, I saw, then I saw. And so he is watching this, and he is enraptured by it. And it's really cool. So I want to make sure we get the big picture again as we're going through this. And if I have time, I'll talk about how the different views are as we finish up today. I'll talk about the different views of that 1,000 years, which is the driver. But if not, I want to just see the big picture. I want to see the beauty and the power and the majesty of this passage. Okay, and it starts out in and one more thing before I get in there. What's interesting about one of the interesting things about this whole section is, we've talked all along about how John is pulling from. He's pulling from his culture that lives around him, the individual cities that are there. He is pulling from the Roman Empire and what's going on with that historically right there in their culture. He's pulling from the Old Testament a lot. That's where he gets most of his material, is Old Testament and the culture that he has. That's not what's happening here. Here he is pulling almost exclusively from what he has already written in the book. I'll give you. I'll do this right now. I'm really good at skipping around. Okay, where's my list at? Some of the stuff we're going to cover here in the as we get into 19 and 20, we're going to see there'll be a white horse, just like in Revelation chapter 6, verse 2. God is called faithful and true in this pattern. Jesus is. And that's from chapter 1, verse 5 and chapter 3, verse 14. There, Jesus' eyes are like blazing fire. We'll see in chapter 20. That comes from Revelation 1, verse 14. He treads the winepress of the fury of his wrath, just like in chapter 14, verses 19 and 20. King of kings and Lord of lords came from chapter 17, verse 14. Angel cried in a loud voice, that's chapter 18, verse 2. The beast, chapter 17, most of the whole chapter. The kings of the earth, chapter 17 again. The mark of the beast, chapter 13. They worshipped his image, chapter 13, lake of burning sulfur, 14, sword coming about, chapter 1, verse 16. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He is pulling together everything he has written in this entire book, and he is bringing it to fruition here. And so we want to make sure we get that. So let's get, starts out chapter 19, verse 11. I covered 2 words, I saw. Now let's go ahead and cover 5 words. I saw heaven standing open. And that pulls us all the way back to chapter 4. Remember, we had the letters to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3, and then the vision really starts proper in chapter 4, and it starts out, after this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the verse just said, I saw heaven standing open. So here he comes. This is a reminder. I'm in heaven. I saw heaven standing open. Okay? And this is going to be him taking all these images he's had before and pulling them into something else. He's going to quote from the church of Laodicea. It's crazy how much he pulls from the church of Pergamum. Everything is in here. Okay. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. Now, 2 things jump out immediately. One is, anytime somebody's called faithful and true, that's probably going to be Jesus, the Lamb of God. That is probably what we're looking at, because God doesn't call it, that's a pretty high title, faithful and true, okay? But it also goes back to chapter, like I said, everything goes back to chapter 6, verse 2. And in chapter 6, there's this rider who comes out as the riders are released in chapter 6. And there's one that parodies the emperor, because the emperor was known for riding a white horse and being all majestic and all this special stuff. And chapter 6 had one parodying the emperor. And now we get the reality, okay? We've got the horse that was like the symbol in chapter 6. And now we've got the reality, which is now Jesus Christ himself rides out on the horse, okay? The rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire. On his head are many crowns. The blazing fire, he can see right through things. He sees everything just like it is. And the many crowns, how do you put many crowns on a head, and why would you say that? That's like stack. Don't try to picture it. Go back just a little bit before. We saw the beasts. The beasts had many heads. On every head were crowns. Jesus has all those crowns in reality on one head. They're his, okay? He has a name written on him that no one knows but himself. And again, that one's weird, okay? Because if you notice, it just said his name is Faithful and True. In verse 13, we're going to be given another name for Jesus. And in verse 16, there's another name given for Jesus, for the Lamb of God, okay? But here's what they're saying, okay? He has a name written on no one knows but himself. He has one private name, because in the Bible and in life in general, naming someone exerts power over them. Okay, you'll notice God would frequently, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, rename people. He named Abram to Abraham. Jesus renamed Peter from Simon, renamed him Peter. From now on, you'll be named Peter. Renaming exerts power. There's no one who has power over Jesus. There's no one who has the power to name him, to call him out. Okay, he has a name written, and so in verse 13, this thing, he's got the name on him, no one knows but himself. He's dressed in a robe dipped in blood. Okay. I hope we're going quick enough. We keep the big picture. We're describing Jesus coming out on the white horse, faithful and true. The robe is dipped in blood. My first response is that's his own blood. No, we're going to see that's not what happens. In 14 verses 19 and 20, that's where he tread the winepress of judgment. And in verse 15, just a little bit later, he's going to tread a winepress, and that's the blood that it's covered. It's the blood of judgment. He is covered in blood of judgment. And his name is the Word of God. Continuing verse 13. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on a white horse, dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Notice, there's no blood on theirs. Jesus' robe is covered in blood. Theirs is not. Actually, ours is not, because we just saw a little bit ago who was dressed in fine linen. That was us. Now, Again, there's a beautiful picture, and already we're marching out with Jesus dressed in white linen, which is not the way soldiers in history have ever dressed. No soldier wears white linen. Linen gets dirty easy. It sucks up blood. It's really a terrible thing to wear. But two things: you're pointing to the purity of the army, and they're pointing also to the fact, I think, that they're not going to fight. They're kind of, we're just coming along to watch Jesus kick butt and take names. That's the sum total. So we can be wearing, matter of fact, it's really kind of a neat image, because this is the climax to a lot of things. This is Jesus coming to bring final judgment on the earth, and it's going to be this big deal. But because he points out we're wearing white linen, that also pulls me back to the verses right before that, where God takes all the saints, us, puts us in white linen. Why we're wearing white linen? Because we're going to the marriage supper of the Lamb. Okay? We're wearing our wedding clothes. And it's almost like, okay, we're heading over to the wedding. Yeah, could you stop by the 7-Eleven and pick up some extra bottles of water because we're a little short? It's almost like an errand that Jesus is running on his way to the wedding. It sounds like it should be this huge, traumatic, violent thing, but for Jesus, it's sort of a stop on the way to the wedding, and we're riding with him. We're in his car, so when he stops to pick up the extra bottles of water for the wedding, we're with him when he does it, except instead of picking up extra bottles of water, Jesus is bringing the final judgment on evil. I mean, that's just how easy it is for Jesus. His army's dressed for a wedding, not for war, and it's just like a little excursion for them, okay? Now, why is it so easy? Because coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword, verse 15, with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter, and we won't spend a lot of time on it, but iron scepter always points us back to Psalm 2, which is like the patron psalm for this whole book of Revelation is Psalm 2. If you haven't read it recently, we've read it a bunch of times. I'm not going to stop and go back to it. It's one of my favorites. It's, why do the nations plot in vain? Okay, he's got the iron scepter. Then here's where the blood comes from. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. And here he's bringing fulfillment to Isaiah 63, verse 3, which says, I have trodden the winepress alone, because nobody else can do it. Jesus is the only one who can tread the winepress. And Isaiah predicts that in Isaiah 63. I have trodden the winepress alone. From the nations no one was with me. I trampled them in my anger. I trod them down in my wrath. Their blood spattered my garments, and I stained all my clothing. So here's Jesus fulfilling prophecy, fulfilling the book of Revelation. And on verse 16, and on his robe and on his thigh, he had this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And now ready for battle. He's here. He's got his escort behind him. They're not really his army. We're just there to watch on the way to the wedding, okay? And he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So it sounds like we're ready for the battle. But that's not going to happen first. The next thing that's going to happen is odd. It's just odd, okay? Verse 17, and I saw, there's that saw again, and I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried out in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, come gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of the kings, generals, the mighty, the horses, their riders, the flesh of all people, free and slave, great and small. There's going to be this mess. Somebody's got to clean it up. Come on, birds, you're in charge. Jesus is about to take everybody out, okay? And it's everybody, the whole spectrum, great and small, kings to slaves. Everybody who has rejected Jesus, who've rejected the Lamb, is about to be judged. There's going to be a mess, and I need the birds to pick it up. But it's sort of fascinating in a gross way. There's two meal introductions, because where are we going? We're the ones in linen. Where are we going? We're going to the marriage supper of the Lamb. But there's another meal that's going to be going on, and that is the birds, the carry-on birds, cleaning up after Jesus' wrath is taken out on all the evil in the world. And then verse 19, we see again, then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider on the horse and his army. And they think it's going to be a real battle, okay? But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. So the head of people just got captured immediately, okay? With these signs, he deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped his image, were pointing back to that beast, okay? The rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the rider on the horse, and all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. Okay? We're back here. The sword of Jesus, the word of God, just comes out and takes everybody out. And we're going, Yeah. Okay, let's go to a party. Okay, that's the natural thing. Now, okay, one more, not one more, but another really cool thing that's happening right here is we're about to go to chapter 20. In chapter 20, as you can see, chapter 20, just a lot of times people have, that's what I broke it up this way, because chapter 19, this story leads straight into chapter 20, okay? So I'm going to cover a lot of verses so I can get you into that whole picture, so you won't be dividing it up into piecemeal. Because if you come to chapter 20 and you're fresh, you'll forget what just happened. Because chapters are big to us, even though they were added like 1,000 years, 1,200 years after Christ. Anyway, but what's really fascinating about chapter 20 to me is chapter 20 calls back chapter 12. And let's go over chapter 12. Chapter 12. This is, follow along. This is cool. Okay, chapter 12. There's this story about the woman who's giving birth to the child, and of course the woman we recognize as we told the story represents the people of God, the Jewish people into the church era with the Christians, and the child that is born is Jesus. Jesus goes straight to heaven. There's a dragon who's waiting for the baby to be born so he can eat the baby, and the moment the baby is born, the baby's taken up to heaven. Then the woman runs into the wilderness. Let's go ahead and I'm going to just read it to you. This is chapter 12. This is the end of chapter 12. When the dragon saw that he'd been hurled to the earth, okay, sorry, got to go back a little bit more. There's that story. The woman runs into the wilderness. Then there's a parallel story where there's a war in heaven, and the dragon is kicked out of heaven. And in verse 13, this is chapter 12, when the dragon saw that he'd been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who'd been giving birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she'd be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river, to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000. Did you notice what just happened? Did you see what I did? I read the end of chapter 12 and jumped straight to chapter 20, and it's flawless. It is completely smooth. There's a bird making neat noises over there. It is completely smooth. You can take chapter 12 and attach it right before chapter 20, and the picture just keeps going. There's this dragon, and the dragon is pursuing the people of God, and then here comes the angel with the chain, and he locks up the dragon and throws him in the abyss. I find that fast. You can because if we look as we look at chapter 20, you're going to hear just constant callbacks to chapter 12, and you could actually take all the stuff out of the middle, slide it to the side, and you wouldn't even notice it wasn't there initially. Just reading straight through, because chapter 12 is fulfilled in chapter 20. That's the conclusion of the story. He makes it very clear. So let's go back now. So now let's read 20 by itself. But remembering, 2 things. We've just come out. We're remembering the story of the woman being pursued by the dragon, and the dragon now pursuing the children of the other woman's other children, those who keep the testimony about Jesus. And then we've also just seen the final judgment, not on demonic powers, not on Satan, not on the enemy, on humans. All the humans who rejected God have just been slaughtered. Okay, in the end of chapter 19, and now in chapter 20, let's go. Let's actually read it again. Okay, and I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and he bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations any more, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. And people have written books about those few verses, but most of the time they miss the big picture. The big picture. This is God getting his final triumph. First he got it. There was the battle where all the humans who were fighting against God were defeated. Then comes this part, and now we're seeing all the enemy is bound and thrown into the abyss, okay, and set free for a short time. We're not going to worry about that. I'm just not going to worry about that part. I want you to see the big picture. If you want to study that stuff, we can do it some other time, okay? I saw, verse 4, I saw thrones on which were seated those who have been given authority to judge, and I saw the souls. Oh, this is not working, is it? I'm already out of time. Oh, going. I was going to cover the rest of this chapter today, but I'm out of time. And so what I said I wasn't going to do, I'm going to do, and then next week we'll come back and do the rest of chapter 20. I'm not going to do that. I am not going to do that. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we're going to do, because I really don't want to separate this up. I don't want to piecemeal it. I want you to get the big picture. So what I'm going to do is I am simply going to read verses 4 through 15, the rest of this chapter. And here's the thing. You're going to get the big picture just hearing me read it. I could stop like I've been doing and insert little things along the way, but they're not going to add much to the picture because you've heard the images. These things make sense to you. So let's just read it, and I want you to just listen. Let it impact you that way, okay? Verse 4, just read that part. And I saw thrones on which were seated those who've been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls who have been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God, and Christ will reign with them for 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they're like the sand of the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. All the bad guys are coming. There's a multitude. There are too many of them. We're in so much trouble. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. Yeah, all the battles here when Jesus is fighting, they're not battles. Devil rounds up everybody because now this is the supernatural and natural final cataclysmic battle, and it's over like that because fire comes down from heaven. And then verse 10, and the devil who deceives them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They were earlier. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were open. Another book was open, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it. Then death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done. Then the death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. And I do need to teach you one thing about this. See the big picture? You heard the big picture? That's amazing. Isn't that cool stuff? That's just powerful. What's happening here is the people who believed in Jesus were part of the first resurrection. We've been raised. Now, at the end of this, however you want to interpret all this stuff, all the remaining dead are brought out, and there are multiple books. And one book is the book of life. And step one is they look in the book of life. Has this person accepted Jesus Christ? Do they have the relationship with Christ? Have they stood for him? And they look down and they read that. And for every one of these, they're not there. Okay, got to understand, this has got to be, depending on how literal this is carried out, but just picture the image in your brain of you're standing before God, and you're hoping and hoping he'll find your name in this book, but it's not there, because if it had been there, you'd already been raised in the first resurrection, okay? And so God looks, the angel looks, whoever does the looking, they look it up, and then after that, they go and pull up the book of works, what you did, okay? And the essence, I think the concept is more, here are the things you did that were wrong. It's not a scale to see whether or not there's enough good to get you into heaven. No, that's already been decided. This is the scale to determine your hell, to determine the lake of fire. And they're judged according to what they've done, and they're thrown into the lake of fire. And again, the two messages that just keep coming out of this book are hope for believers, and also for believers, the necessity of sharing Jesus with other people. We can get into the rut of thinking that after everything is gone, that people just disappear. But the Bible teaches punishment. The Bible teaches judgment on these people. And we need to recognize that person that you know who's rejecting Jesus is destined for judgment unless they accept him. So be salt and light. Be the light of the world. Be all these great things that people need you to be, because there really is a judgment. It is a very real thing. And so that's what happens in chapters 19 and into 20, is that final judgment, which is real. So we saw last few weeks, we saw the preparation, the first woman, the judgment on the woman who was the harlot, the unholy hooker. We've seen the judgment, the final judgment. Now evil is gone. There's going to be no more mention of bad and evil. And now we're going to come to chapter 21 and 22, which is the celebration and the victory and the wedding supper of the Lamb. Okay, that's what we got left. All right, looking forward to it. See you next time.